So, good morning. We'll continue our discussions with uh, JDBC. So, JDBC stands for Java Database Connectivity. So, as we discussed embedded SQL statements in our last class. So, in these JDBC connectivity, those SQL statements will appear in the function calls in the host language. So there should be a translation from the host programming language into a DBMS specific things. So that translation will be done by the driver. So in our programming language, whatever the language or the database we use, there will be a program or a software called as a driver. And these drivers are dynamically loaded on demand, and they are the software programs that converts the commands or the APIs into DBMS specific things. So loading of this driver uh, is the initial step of connectivity. And once the connection is established through the driver, so then we have to open the connection and then submit our queries. So driver is a software program that translate the JDBC or ODBC. So we have another concept, that is ODBC. So ODBC means Open Database Connectivity. So that we use in Windows platforms. So driver translate the ODBC or JDBC calls into DBMS specific calls. So and drivers are loaded dynamically on demand, since the DBMS application is going to access will be known to us only at the runtime. So with that, we shall look into the architecture. So JDBC drivers are updated and maintained by the Oracle itself. So if you want to download the latest packages, then you have to visit the Oracle website and download them. So architecture of JDBC has four main components: the application, driver manager, then several data source specific drivers and data sources. So these things. So application, driver manager, driver itself, and data source. So application initiates and terminates the connection with the data source. So it sets the transaction boundaries, it submits the SQL statements and retrieve the results. So although a well-defined interface as specified by the JDBC API, the primary goal of the driver manager is to load the JDBC drivers and pass JDBC function calls from application to the correct driver. Suppose if we have multiple databases, each one require a separate driver. So when this SQL commands or a API is called, then it is the functionality of the driver manager to load the correct driver. Whether we want to load the JDBC driver or ODBC or something specific to MySQL. So that will be decided by the driver manager. Then the driver will establish the connection with the data source. So data source here means it is a database. So in addition to submitting the request and returning the request results, the driver is also responsible for translating data, translating error formats, error code from the form that is specific to the database to the JDBC standard. So if there are any errors in the SQL statements that we pass, that also has to be processed by the driver. So data source it processes the commands from the driver and returns the results. So these are the four main components of the database connectivity. So the application itself, where it's initiate and terminate the connection, driver manager will load the drivers, then driver will connect it and translate the data, and the data source will process the commands. So depending on the relative location of the data source and the application, so several application scenarios are possible. So drivers in JDBC are classified into four different types of drivers. So this is again based on the architectural relationship between the application and the data source. So whether the application and the database, whether they are in the same machine or in the same network or in the different geography. So based on that, so the four different type of drivers are there. First one is a bridge driver. So this is also called as a type 1. So type 1 bridge. So in this type of driver, it translates the JDBC function calls into calls of another API that is not native to DBMS. So for example, a JDBC ODBC bridge. An application can use JDBC calls to access a ODBC compliant data source. The application loads only one driver, that is a bridge. So bridge have an advantage that it is easy to piggyback the application on the existing installation. So no new drivers are required here, but still they have certain drawbacks. The increased number of layer between the data source and the application, they affect the performance. So this is useful only when we want to access or to write a program in one particular platform, but the support that is given by the database, it is in another platform. So in order to bridge these two platforms, we will require the help of a bridge driver. So that is type 1. So in type 2, it is the direct translation to native API via non-Java driver. So whatever we are discussing here, this is specific to Java. So in this type of driver, translate the JDBC function calls directly into method invocations of API of one specific data source. So here the driver is usually written in a combination of maybe C++ and Java. So and it is dynamically linked and specific to the data source. So this architecture's performance is significantly better than the ODBC JDBC bridge. But still it has a disadvantage that the database driver that implements the API needs to be installed on each machine that it runs. So in the second time, it is a direct translation from Java to the database platform. Next, type 3, that is the network bridge. So in the network bridge, the driver communicates over a network to a server, and then it translates the JDBC request into the DBMS specific method invocation. So in this case, driver on the client machine is not DBMS specific. The JDBC driver loaded by the application can be a very quite small, and only functionality it needs to implement is sending the SQL statements to the middleware server. The middleware server can then use some other drivers like a type 2 JDBC driver to connect to the data source. So in the network bridge, the task of this particular host machine is to just communicate with the middleware server, and server will take care of all the other things to connect to the um, database. Then type 4. So type 4 is a direct translation to native API via Java driver. So instead of calling the DBMS API directly, the driver communicates with the DBMS through Java sockets. So sockets are nothing but a mechanism of interacting with the database. So in this case, what happens? The driver on the client side is written in Java, but it is specific to the database. It translates the JDBC calls into native APIs of the database system. So this solution doesn't require an intermediate layer since the implementation is all in Java and it has a good performance. So these are the four types of driver depending on the platform of Java and the platform of DBMS and where it is residing. So in the bridge, it is expected to be in the same machine or different platform. So one is in JDBC, another one is ODBC. In the second method, it is a direct translation. But here, application and data source, it is assumed to be in the same machine. Network bridge, so where JDBC will communicate with the just a middleware server and server will take care of the connectivity with the database. And in the fourth one, so it's a direct translation. So this is a pictorial representation. So Java application we have. Java application will handle or pass the commands to the JDBC driver manager. So driver manager, again there will be four types. So depending on the application platform and the database platform, so the driver manager will load the specific driver. So which one to choose among the four. So then what happens? They in turn connect with the DBMS. So if you observe here in the first type, so it is JDBC, but the connection is to the native driver, that is DBMS specific. Then this DBMS specific will connect to the DBMS. Then in the bridge, so we will connect to the ODBC and ODBC will connect to the DBMS. Whereas in case of the fourth one, that is a type 4, so it's a direct connections. But here there will be a middleware server. So Java classes and interfaces. So, JDBC is a collection of Java class and interface. So it enables the database access from the programs written in the Java language. So in order to establish the connectivity, so there are certain steps we must follow. First and the foremost thing, what we have to do in our program is to load the JDBC driver. So first thing what happens is the loading of the driver. So in order to load the driver also, we have some APIs or function calls which we will call. So when those function calls are done, so automatically driver will be loaded into the runtime environment. So once the driver is loaded, then we will connect it to the data source. So data source means database. So in order to connect to the database, we have to specify few things. So that is the URL at which the DBMS is running, the user account to which we want to log in. That is the username and password also has to be specified. So once we connect to the DBMS by specifying its URL, its username and password. So next thing is we can directly pass the SQL statements to execute. So once SQL statements are executed, then the results will be returned from the database. So the result returned by the database we will be storing in certain objects. So special objects called may be called as a result set. Then this result set will process, which means we will iterate over those and extract the data. So once everything is over, we have to terminate the connection. So in order to perform all these 5 tasks, we have certain class and interfaces already defined in the java.sql package. So driver management. So all drivers are managed by the driver manager class. So this is the first step, that is loading of JDBC driver. So in the Java code, what we have to do is, this is the function or a statement which we need to include, that is class dot for name Within that, we have to specify the driver, that is oracle slash jdbc dot driver dot oracle driver. So this will load the oracle driver, which means we are connecting for the oracle database. So if we are connecting for another database, maybe SQL server or Windows IIS servers or MySQL, so a different class name, I mean here this driver name will be specified. So this is a single statement which we are using. So there are two other ways of registering the driver, so which include uh, we can store the driver name in some variable and then pass it, or directly specify it in the class name. So using this method, that is d jdbc.drivers is equal to oracle slash jdbc.driver. So we can either specify like this or directly use this one. So next, establishing the connection with the database. So in order to interact with the database through sessions, so each connection identifies a logical session. Uh, the syntax to specify it connect is this. We have to specify the URL. So URL will appear like this: jdbc colon oracle colon www dot. So this is the URL of the database. So if we run our in our own system, then instead of this www.bookstore.com, we will be having localhost or 127.0.0.1 colon. This is the port number. So whenever you open a Oracle, so you can observe this port number on the URL. So then a special object is there of class, that is connection. So this is built into the SQL package in Java. So that is the connection class. So one connection object we have to declare. After declaring the connection object, so we will put everything in a try catch block because there might be an exception. Then the API to get the connection is driver manager dot get connection. For this connection, we have to pass the URL, username and password of the database. The exception that might be thrown is a special type, that is SQL exception. So just like how we catch the IO exceptions or the generic exception, so we can also catch the SQL exception. So in order to connect to the DBMS, only one API we need to call, that is driver manager dot get connection. And this connection we can declare here itself, so it doesn't matter. So it returns the connection object. Next, whatever API we call, so that will be using this particular object, that is CON, connection object. And this driver manager is a static one that gets loaded when we call class.farname. So first statement is class.farname, next statement is driver manager.get connection. So apart from this, so there are certain interfaces that are provided in Java, that is get transaction isolation. So this gets or sets the isolation level for current connection. Then get read only, set read only. So it specifies if the transaction to this connection is read only or write only. So which means whether we are only reading the data from the database or at the same time we are writing data or updating the data. So those things we can set as a security measure. Then auto commit. So auto commit means after each and every command we execute, the database gets committed. So committed means a state will be created and no change, or just a restoration point is created. Or if anything goes wrong, we can roll back, abort the transaction and roll back. So is closed boolean is closed. So is closed is to check whether the connection which we created, it is either it is still open or it gets closed. So next, executing the SQL statements. So there are many other ways to execute the statements. So there are three kinds of SQL statement. One is the normal statements, prepared statement, and callable statements. So these statements are both static and dynamic SQL statements, we can specify. So prepared statement is a semi-static SQL statement where a part of the SQL command we will specify first. Callable statement, it is the stored procedure. So we shall study what is the stored procedure. So stored procedure is nothing but a function or a procedure which is created and stored in the Dbms, and we'll just call that procedure using the function calls and pass the variables, and the result we will get back. So in the prepared statement class, so the dynamically a pre-compiled SQL statement, if you want to use some of the SQL statements again and again, or several times we are using the same statements, then what we can do is we can go for prepared statements where we will already have a pre-compiled statement. Only places where we want to inject the variable values that will be left, that we need to specify. For example, again and again we have a requirement to extract the student details. So then what we'll do is we'll just prepare a statement, and passing of USN we will leave it. That passing of USN will happen at the runtime. Then just value will be replaced in the pre-compiled statement. Then the query is executed. So the advantage of prepared statement is that if you want to run a query again and again, then compilation time can be greatly reduced if we have a pre-compiled SQL statement. So this is useful when we know the structure of the SQL query is fixed and only the value of the parameters are determined at the runtime. So some examples include, so just look at this. String SQL is equal to insert into sailor's values, and we will leave the values like this, question mark. So these question marks will be filled. Then what happens? So in the connection dot prepare statement is a API. So that is used to uh, have a prepared statement from this particular string. So this string we are passing. So then we will get a prepared statements. So prepare statement that clear parameter. So initially, if we have some default values in the variable, so we'll just clear them off. Then we'll keep on setting. Set integer 1 comma SID. So now parameter 1 is fixed. The second parameter is a string, so we'll pass set string 2 sname. Third parameter is an integer, set int rating, set float 4. So this 1, 2, 3, 4, so whatever we have, they will be injected into these question marks. Then what we'll do is, in order to execute it, the command that we have to use is execute update. So then what happens? So P statement is the prepared statement, so which we have already created over here. So then this statement or this command gets executed, and it returns the number of rows that are inserted into the database. So throughout this, we'll just be learning the APIs. So these things you can utilize if you are building the mini project in Java platform. So then you will be using these particular statements in order to connect to the database, prepare a command, execute and check the results. So result set. So whatever command we pass, they get executed on the database and some results are generated. If it is a insert statement, then we'll get to know how many rows are inserted. If it is update command, then we'll get to know how many rows are updated. Or if it is a select command, then it will return the entire tuples in the result. So all those records we have to process. So what we do is whenever we execute a query, expecting that some rows are returned and we need to process them. So we'll call the command execute query of SQL. So SQL is the command statement. So if you observe in the previous statement, we used execute update. So when we use execute update, we know that rows will not be returned. Just the number of rows updated will be returned in insert and update statements, or even delete statement. For insert, update and delete, so we will use execute update where we are not expecting a row to be returned, only the number of rows affected will be returned. Whereas when we have a select commands, so we expect the rows to be returned. So in that scenario, we will use execute query of SQL. So what is SQL? So SQL is the statement or a string. Then on a prepared statement, so we are using this, the entire result whatever is written, so that belong to a class, that is result set. Result set rs is equal to this particular statement. Now rs is a result set object. On rs we will extract each row, rs dot next. So rs will first point to the first row in the result, next will take us to the next row. So unless and until all the elements are iterated, so we can put it entire thing in a while loop. Then further how to extract each column value, so we shall look into it. So result set is a very powerful cursor. So as we discussed yesterday, cursor is nothing but a mechanism of iterating over all the result rows. So result set has some of the functions, that is previous, where it moves one row back, absolute, where we can take the cursor to the specified number of rows. If I want to read only fifth row, I can specify absolute of 5. Relative, so whether I want to move 3 position forward or 4 position backward, that can be done based on the current position. First and last, we'll move the cursor to the first row or the last row. So this is the matching data type in result set which we are utilizing. So if the SQL type on one side, Java class type on the other side, and the method that we use to extract them. For example, if it is a varchar or a string data type, we can use get string. So which means automatically the value gets converted into string type. So these are the result set get method, so which we will be shortly be using in order to extract the data. So get boolean, get string, get string. So depending on the attribute type of the database table, we have to use the required one. So if it's a date data type, then we have to use get date, get time. Then automatically what happens, that particular attribute will be converted to date type. So now let us look at this particular example. Yeah. Suppose here, if we want to read the result, then what we have to do is, here inside this while loop, we have to write the command like this: rs dot get string of 1. So what does it do is it gets us the first value. So in the while loop, we are processing only one row. So one row, within that row, first column will be extracted. So if I write get string of 2, then it gets the second value, that is the second column value, and converts it into string. Or, so most probably what methodology we follow is we'll write like this: get string, and I know the attribute name is USN. So what I will do is I will just write like this. So instead of specifying the number, so I will specify the USN, and this USN value string USN is equal to like this. So in a programming language, so I have extracted the USN of a student and stored it in some temporary variable. So just like this, so if I want to extract their marks value, then I can write like this: get int of marks, like this. So here whatever I am writing in the single quote, it is the name of the attribute that we have used in the database table. Now what happened? The USN and marks of the student are extracted in the while loop. Then we can use them, store them in an array, and process them in whatever way we want. So put all this USN and marks in an array. Once we come out of the while loop, we will be having an array with all the USNs and marks. So this is how we process the result set. So whether to use get string, get int, or get date, that depends on the data type that we have used in the database. Then examining database metadata. So metadata is nothing but the information about the data itself. It is nothing but a catalog, so which we have used in our databases. So in order to extract the metadata, so we can use this particular function called connection.get metadata. Again in Java we have a class that is database metadata. So this is a class itself that is present in java.sql package. So this class will hold the details of the metadata. So this metadata includes the driver name, the driver version. If I want to print the name of the driver and its version, then I have to use md.get driver name. Md means the metadata object. So we have extracted it, and in this using this object, so we can call the APIs driver dot md dot get driver version. So this will get the version of the database driver. Similarly, we can also extract the certain metadatas like get tables. So get tables means, so we can extract the table names that are present in the database. So similarly, how we extract the rows, in the same way we can extract the tables. So get tables and pass 4 null values. So then iterate over all the result set. Anyway, similar result set is there, result set dot next. So each table name we can get using trs dot get string. Here since it's a table name itself and it's not an attribute, so we have to use table underscore name, then we can print it. If we want to get the columns of this table name, then what we have to do is
declare one more result set, that is CRS md dot get columns of table name. So this table name whatever we got in the first iteration, so the same name you pass over here. The third attribute should be table name, all the other three will be null. Then this first table what we extracted and stored here in this particular variable, for the same table all the column names will be extracted. So in order to extract the column name, so we have to use get string of column underscore name, and we can print it. So while printing we can do all the formatting that we do, concatenation operation, all those things so can be done. So using the metadata we can extract the table names, database the driver version, driver name, and all the column names. So yeah, a complete example of this entire thing we'll discuss in our next class. So you can enter your attendance in the chat window.